Hello and welcome to 10 Ton Potato, the podcast where we talk about actual productivity on the Office 365 stack. I'm Brad and I'm joined by my co-host Craig, and we are the founders of GT Consult. Hey Craig.
Yeah, good and you. Although it's a sad day to see you in London in a short sleeve shirt and I'm in Cape Town, and I had to just pull off my beanie because it's winter's on its way.
There's no short sleeve. There's one underneath this.
Yeah. Fair enough.
It's still not warm enough for a short sleeve.
Come on, heat wave.
Yeah, heat wave soon, 21 degrees. It's going to be amazing. So nice. Today we're going to be talking about dynamic forms with JSON objects, which is super cool. But I wanted to just quickly have a look at one of the comments on our videos. So we did a video a few weeks back on SharePoint embedded, and we got Perry A3550, and he goes, "Have you guys gotten to play with this at all?" And then I responded, "We're working on a unique project. Could probably share an update for sure." And Perry responded with would love to hear your thoughts on what deployment might look like, especially when pairing the stuff with something like an Azure SQL database. If you found a way to get Power Automate involved in this, and any bugs or limitations you guys have encountered. So thanks, Perry A3550. Craig, we were chatting just before this, and you said some interesting insights to this.
Yeah, well, I mean, development is one thing, deployment's the other. The development, I mean, we already are building a lot of applications within SharePoint, which we do at GT, that focus around integration. And I'll actually be showing you some of that today, both through SharePoint framework extensions as well as Power Apps. So we've been doing it. The deployment is a little bit tricky when it comes to the SharePoint embedded side of it, though. And what we've been playing with there, actually working with Microsoft, is deploying resources utilizing Azure. And in that case, things like a flow would actually be better in Logic Apps because you can create a deployment package with all of your functionality within Azure as a single package that can be configured. You upload it and off you go. So I definitely would lean that way for simplicity's sake. When it comes to Power Automate, if you're now trying to deploy that along with Azure resources, a little bit more difficult because you have to configure that Power Automate in your environment. So whilst you've got the connectors and all of the rest, that deploy as a Power Automate package, just a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. So did you say that you would avoid Logic Apps and go with Flow?
No. I'd use Logic Apps for the deployment rather than Power Automate because there you can package your Logic Apps within your Azure package and deploy them along with the DB when you want to set up in another environment.
And then the trick would be connecting your instance of SharePoint or embedded with that.
Correct, but you'd put that as part of the configuration where you'd need to put in a URL. And that would be your SharePoint URL, and then right throughout your Logic Apps, that would be updated. So it saves as a variable in your collection when you package it.
Yeah. So then your deployment pack, you would update the variable. Boom.
Correct.
And the credentials for that.
It'll pick up your credentials logging into Azure, but if there are any connectors that it needs credentials for, then it's going to ask you for those as part of the deployment.
Because I quite like the idea of SharePoint embedded to also create like a DMZ zone. So when you're sharing information or gathering information, you put it in a completely different area, and you can have different authentication to it even. So you don't have to give people access to your environment. You create a new environment, new authentication, or different authentication, jump in and out of that spot, so they can't kind of hop from there to your environment.
Most certainly. And I think that's really where we can actually see Microsoft going that way in any case with the likes of Copilot. We now, similar kind of concept where you segment areas and Copilot only has access to certain areas. And the same for embedded. You only want certain accounts to have access into that area and leave it
Mm.
quite secure.
Yeah, I quite like that. So thank you, Perrier3550. Hopefully, we can show you some cool demos in the future. But on to our topic for today. Craig, you sent me a message about a video that you had seen and how this kind of had blew your mind. Dynamic forms from a JSON object. Okay.
Yeah, well, I got the video based on the fact that Brad likes to set me challenges. I think he does this for his own amusement, and we work in a very dynamic environment, and we are, as I mentioned earlier, we like building apps, and we invariably do that using SharePoint framework extensions because it allows us to be extremely dynamic in terms of the products that we build. But Brad was asking me, well, surely we can do the same thing in Power Apps. And that had my brain going. And as per usual, when my brain gets going, I first go and research anything. And the first place I go whenever it has to do with Power Apps, I go onto YouTube, and there's a guy named Reza Dorani. Amazing content creator. If you're looking for information, and we'll add the link as well. But anything to do around Power Apps that you haven't really figured out yourself before, and he set us off on the right direction here. So, and we're going to show you exactly that. So, a bit of a techie session today, showing you how we normally do things with SPFX, and then showing you how we can do something similar in Power Apps. Now, I suppose you ask why do this? But as an example, when we're building an application, we're not thinking about the specific end client that we're deploying this for. We're thinking about where we could potentially reuse this and reconfigure it. And if you can do that for SPFX, surely a similar type of solution should be available for Power Apps, where you don't need to manipulate and rebuild the Power App every time there's a change in terms of configuration. So I think quite useful in terms of the implementation there.
Yeah, I think, if you can change the input forms based on each individual user, that also from the user experience type of thing changes the game as well. Because now, if the information changes, you don't have to, you can get different information from the end user every time, which makes your application dynamic and smart.
Yeah, but I mean, let's take as an example a content type. Your typical content type in SharePoint, you could have multiple content types for a
Mhm.
list, which works really well. But if you've got an end user who now needs to go and configure a solution and they want a very specific look and feel and interaction, then they're not going to be able to do that. And so that's why we normally go the SPFX route. But if you can do it in Power Apps, even more power to the end user, because let's face it, not everyone can build an SPFX
No.
web part. Whereas utilizing this functionality that I'm going to show you today, you can most certainly build a dynamic form that you can customize as much as you like. And it doesn't require changes to back end lists and updating content types and all of the rest. All it is basically updating configuration, and that configuration rolls out to your entire deployment.
So, what can you show us?
Okay, let's jump into it. So let me just share my screen.
For those of you that are listening on the podcast and not watching on YouTube, Craig is now taking his shirt off.
No one wants to see that, Brad. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen now. And
What we
what
can
I'm
see
showing
is
you,
the podcastle screen,
always
and now we
fun,
can see a
always.
cascading of the podcastle screen into infinity, and
Well,
it's happened again.
there we go again.
There you go. I see.
Well,
I see
hey,
it. Let's go.
Whilst we've gone into infinity, what I'm actually showing you now is one of our vendor management applications. And the reason why I wanted to show you this is I think it gives you a good insight into the types of forms that we're talking about. So imagine you're putting down a vendor management tool and you want to add a vendor. You'll need to fill in a number of different details, and those might be required fields, they might be different types of fields like a people picker. Or you could have functionality like adding in multiple rows of data, as an example. Now, these aren't your usual SharePoint types of controls to start off with. But the reality is that the fields that we might capture for a vendor management tool might be different to the fields that you want
Yeah.
to capture. So, in terms of configuring, well, you probably need a solution whereby you can configure these forms. So, what we generally do is we make these forms dynamic and we use a thing called JSON forms to actually build out our
Yeah.
form. And what I'm showing you here, a little bit techie, but we take a JSON object and that represents the form using HTML. So, as an example, if I want to look at something like an array, well, a little bit more complicated here, but you can see an array of data that I can just keep adding to. And in this case, it's adding multiple friends with a nickname, a gender, and an age, and quite dynamic in terms of the
But then
functionality.
you have to add all of these into the SharePoint list, right?
Well, yes and no. So the way that we handle this in terms of SharePoint is that when we save the data, we don't save it as a single column in SharePoint. So there won't be a person's nickname, a gender, and an age as three columns
But
within
then, Craig,
SharePoint.
how
In
do you get
fact,
the information back then?
wow, let's go to one of our backend lists here, and I'll show you exactly how. So when we save data, what we can see is we save a title, and then we save data in a JSON
Okay.
object. So the same as we're saving information in or utilizing JSON to represent
Yeah.
the form, the information that we save is in one column and it is broken up into JSON that we can then
Yeah.
manipulate. So we can utilize that JSON object in a Power Automate flow. We can bring the data back to our forms and it will know how to read it because it tells it what's the field name, what's the value that was saved. If there's an array, it puts everything into these square brackets, etc. So as a non-techie person, this code just tells the form what it needs to do. And if there are changes to the form, it's fine. Whatever it doesn't find within that code, it will just show up the new field as blank, and then you can continue from there. So, in terms of that, it allows you to be completely dynamic in terms of how much data and where you can store it. And we always store this in a multi-line text
Yeah.
field and then bring the data back and manipulate it accordingly. But you can also write things where you can write a status out or some metadata information and push information from this form to that. We only do that for certain fields, things like a status or a ticket ID that it relates to. But the rest of the data we keep in that all form content. Does that
Yeah,
make
I
sense,
think it
Brad?
makes a lot of sense. I'm just so then, how do you search on the data afterwards?
So what we will generally do is put the data into a table, like a data table that using
Yeah.
datatable.net, and we extract the data. So when we extract all the form content, and then we just push out all of the fields, and then you can filter on any of the fields that are provided using the data table in the background.
So you could also you could
Not
insert that
sure if
to
I don't have any here, but this is our data table
yeah.
example where you can type in search or have search against any of the columns where you might be pulling the data
And so
through.
you could use that to search or plug that into an Azure SQL database as well, right?
Yeah, you can export the information into CSV, into a PDF. You can do really whatever you want. And if you're using a Power App or a Logic app behind the scenes, they can read JSON. So you can quite easily parse the JSON and do whatever you need to against any of the values that have
And
been
could
saved.
we technically deploy this into a embedded SharePoint and then pull information into this alternative SharePoint platform? So, like, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
most
all right.
certainly. So it doesn't really matter where that information is saved. And actually, when you save large strings of data into SQL, it generally will be able to represent it in a JSON
Yeah.
format as well. So whether that data is stored in that minimalist way in JSON within SharePoint or in SQL doesn't really matter where. It's a universal kind of way of storing text information.
So we know how to do it in SharePoint. What about Power Apps?
Okay, excellent. So let's move across to Power Apps. And in terms of Power Apps, I tried to set up a very similar type of scenario. So I created an app, and I'm focusing that app specifically on user information. And clearly, I didn't sacrifice anything to the demo chickens because it's taking a little while to load. So I've got a Power App, and it's got two simple screens. The first screen is just my loading screen where I've got the ability to click on a plus button to add in a new user to my
Mm-hmm.
system. Now, if I'm adding in a user, I want a form to be able to capture any of the details about that user and capture any specific
Sure.
information. But I need to do a whole lot of work before I get to the point of having that form. And that work is loading information like my form template
Mm-hmm.
information and also having somewhere to save
Yeah.
the results. So let's go and have a look quickly at this form template. I've got a SharePoint site here. And you don't need to use a SharePoint site for this. You could use any kind of flat file of JSON or whatever it might be. I just thought for simplicity reasons, let's create an object using a SharePoint list so it's easy to add in new fields. So you can see here the fields that I want. There's full name, address, gender, active, start date, and age. Now, those I've chosen specifically because I expect their control types to be
Yeah.
different. So, for instance, full name will be text. An address will be multi-lines of text. A gender, we probably want a choice. And if we have a choice, well, I've got here male, female, or rather
Yeah.
not say. And for the others, I've got whether this is required or not required. We've got a Boolean, so yes or no. We've got a date, we've got a number. And that's just to show you the kind of dynamism that we can build into these controls. Quite importantly as well, you might want to add in a new control and you want to make sure that they are in the right order. And you decide, you know what, after full name, I want a title. Well, then you can put title in and you can put in an order, and then it will tell the form what order these controls should
Yep.
stay in. So here we've put in full name, age, etc.
Cool.
Okay, so that's our
Yeah.
configuration form, and we import that when we start the form, and we do that using the app and on start. So over here, you'll actually see that we go and get information from the form template, and we get the fields title, required, control, choice, and
Yeah.
order by. And then we add in another field, and that is the data field. And that is for us to store the results from whatever we
And we're going
pull
to
through.
store it as a JSON.
We will, and I'll get there now. So we create that collection, and then we click on the plus button, which then clears the collection, tells us that this is a new form. We're going to save the results to user results, and we're going to navigate to the add user area. Okay, so we've navigated to the add user area, and what you'll see here is my fields: full name, age, gender, address, active,
Yeah.
and start date. Now, some of them have controls and some don't, and I did that on purpose so I can actually show you how we build the controls. So let's jump into how we build this out. So firstly, this is a gallery. It's not a form. So the difference there being that a form would be if I had a list with these
Yeah.
columns, it would automatically build out
Yeah.
the form. I just need to point it to the right data source. In this case, I'm pointing the data source to my list of items, which is the
Yeah.
form templates. So this is multiple lines. So here, if we click in here, we'll see that this is a gallery, and you can edit a gallery and add items like our text box here by just
Yeah.
dragging it in, and then it will apply to absolutely everything. But I don't want a text box for everything because I've got things like date controls and yes and no's. So how do we add in a new item? Well, let's go and add one for age. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert an input, and it's going to be a text input for age. So I'll go and drop that input in there, and you'll notice it actually adds it to every single
Yeah.
item. Okay, so this I want to be age. So firstly, I don't want a default value, so let's go and get rid of the default value here. Secondly, I only want to show this if the input is a number type, because age is a number. So we go and change the visibility.
Age is just a number.
Age is just a number. So currently it's set to true. But I don't want this to be shown all the time. I only want it if this item, control types,
Equals age. Age.
is equal to number.
Damn it, lost.
Oh, and it also helps if you put in the correct parentheses. Okay, so we'll see here that it's now popped in a control at age here. And you know what? Let's make this smaller so we can see there's a little bit of a difference. And also say, you know what? This isn't a text. This
Yeah.
is a number. So that puts in some validity.
What happens if
there.
you had two numbers?
It doesn't matter. That's why, because it will still show a control for a number. If I had age and let's say height, and they were both numbers, it would show both the age and the height, but just different controls. So the title over here is pulled through from the field. So if we went back to our list and, well, let's put in an example. Let's go and add a new item. And let's call it height. Let's make it a number. And let's say required yes. And there are no choices. And we'll put that at 7 and save the information. Okay, so we've now added in a new field. Let's jump back in here. What I'm going to do is I am going to jump back to my host screen. And over here, I'm going to run on start. And that should hopefully refresh my information. So if I jump across to add new, well, there's height now, and height has a control.
Awesome.
Okay. Now, we also need to put in gender. Now, you do the same for a yes, no, and a start, just using the controls like a date picker or a toggle for yes, no. But the one that becomes a little bit more tricky is where you've got a choice. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to go back into this item.
Why is it tricky?
Over here.
Why can't you just use a drop down? Easy.
I'm going to use a drop down, but how you configure that is a little bit different. So in this case, I'm going to pop in my drop down. Great. So in this case, what do we want as the values for that drop down?
Male,
we want
female, rather not say.
Choices. Exactly. So let's first set the visibility. So we're only dealing with the one, and this will be this item dot controls dot value is equal to choice.
This item's choices.
Okay, there we go. So that's choice.
Easy.
Right? Now, the value that we want to add into the items, we could say this item dot choices. But what we see is this actually throws an error. And the reason for that is if we come over to this item's choices, this is just text. We actually need this to be an object.
Okay. Yeah.
So what we're going to do is add in a function here to say split.
Yes. On comma.
And this is going to be this item's choices. And we want to split it on semicolon. And there we go. Now we've got our drop down with male, female, etc. So if we go and play this, we can fill in our form. We've got the male, female, rather not say. We've got the yes, no for active. We've got our full start date control. We've got short text. We've got multi-line
Yeah.
text. And to see that, we can just jump out into these controls again. Let me just jump in here. And you can see things like my text input 2 is the long one. That's my multi-line. And we can see here under the mode, it's gone from single line to multi-line, etc. So we're basically building up a control per type of column that we want. And as we've shown here, we can also dynamically add in any controls
Once
we
we've
want.
obviously created the input object, right?
Correct. So over here, we can add in an email
Yeah.
address or whatever, and it's just going to keep building out
Yeah.
this form. But the nice thing here is I never, ever have to go and update the Power App. I just
Once
have
you've
to
done
add
all of
in
the
a new
work, you just
configuration.
manage it from one
Yeah.
area.
Change the ordering, do
Yeah.
whatever you need, and it will
That's cool.
automatically update. Yeah. The tricky part, though, comes in the
Yeah.
submit. So this gets a little bit complicated. I'll go through it easily, though, and just show you what we're doing. So we've got all of our values filled in here, and they're filled in against my gallery with the my complete template schema gallery, which is what I created when we moved across here. So just coming back to that, let me just go to the button here. I clicked on the new button. In doing so, I created this collection called My Template
Yeah.
Schema, and then I've moved us across to the Add User page, and this information over here is the when it's captured into that Add Template Schema. But now I want to get the values out of that and save it to a results area. And in doing so, I actually need to loop through everything in the gallery, pull out the values, and then based off of the values, pop them into a JSON object.
Yeah.
But I also need to identify what type of column they are. Thanks, Brad. Nice little kiss there. Don't know why my WhatsApps are coming through, seeing as I'm on private mode. But anyway, so for each of the fields, I need to give it a value, and I need to say what field they're actually coming from. So in this case, we've got a text value coming from text field 1. So if we submit their text value coming from text field 1, I've got a date value coming from the date picker field. I've got a Boolean coming from the toggle. I've got a multi-text. So what we haven't done is choices and numbers. So in order to update that, we could simply just copy this text here and go, a number is coming from, I think it was text input 3. So that would be text input 3.text. And our, what was our other one? Our choice is coming from drop down 1.
Yeah.
Now, drop down 1 doesn't have text. So
objects.
we need to go drop down 1 dot selected text dot value. So just depending on the type of field that you're bringing back here, it's like toggle.value or date picker.selected date, drop downs selected text dot value, and then we've just got text, etc. Once we've got that
Yeah.
data, we're then going to use the patch command, and the patch command sends the result to our user results area. And what we're going to do is we use the default because it's new, and our title we're just going to set to now being the date, and then all of our results we're going to push into a result JSON, which is a multi-text field. So let's pop over to our user results. We've only got two fields here. We've got an input field and we've got result JSON being the result, very similar to what I
Yes.
showed you with the SPFX one. So let's give that a go. Hopefully that's all going to work out. Once it's done the patch, it's going to clear my collection and then it's going to move us back to the main screen. So let's give that a run. So I'll start on my main screen here. Going to open up, I'm going to press plus, and here is my empty form with all of my fields. Brad test. How old are you now,
11.
Brad? 40, 41. Rather not say. Somewhere in Sussex.
Well,
Can't spell.
it's Surrey, but never mind.
Surrey. Whoa. Cal, just put you as 101 Yip Diago. You're active. Start date, let's make that today. And height, let's just go 184. And we submit that data. Now, hopefully with the changes that I made, it's now moved us back to this form. And if we go in here to our user results, let's just do a little update. Oh. So let's see if we've hit an error here somewhere.
See where it says errors 10. That's because of your bad naming conventions.
Missing tab, stop. Oh. Okay. So clearly my update there wasn't 100%, as per the discussion, didn't sacrifice the chickens, but the real value coming through here is that you can grab the date.
There it is.
There it was. It was just taking a little time. Sure, I was worried about that there. But if we go in and have a look at the data, what you can see is it's JSON data where it's showing the control type being text. It's showing that the data is Brad. It shows that whether this is required or whether it's a choice, etc. So when we push this back into our form, it will take those values and automatically load them. And you can push them back into your form by adding in a gallery here. There is a little bit of manipulation that you do need to do, because if we go and pop in a gallery here and point that at our user results,
it's going to give you back there.
It's going to show JSON data, but you can actually strip out that JSON data utilizing the JSON string objects. Now, I'm not going to go through all of that. It's a little bit technical. You'll see on the link to Reza's information how you can configure that. But I think it gives you a good way to dynamically create that form and kind of points to the solution that we were talking about there, in having that dynamic form for a project where you deploy it.
Awesome. Well, that was super insightful.
Cool.
And obviously, I mean, plenty of scenarios where you would love to use something like that.
Yes, very techy. And I did say, you would put this in place so that your end user can actually use it. Well, I'm not thinking that your end user would necessarily create the loading forms, etc. I think you'd still get a technical person to sort out all of that JSON bit. But
they would also be able to update. So if they want an additional field for something, they could do that.
Yeah. They come along, they go to the Ford template, they say, you know what, I now need an email address. And that'll be text. Is it required? Yes. And, very easy to go and manipulate. The only one that you need a little bit of training around is to know that a choice, you put in the choices with the different semicolons, and then it's done. And then you come back into your app and you restart it, and all of your changes should be available there against your form template. So yeah, a very, very
Yeah,
usable
I
there.
really like that. I can see some very good applications for it. So thank you so much
Yeah,
for.
no problem. Just a short
Yeah,
one
I mean,
today.
not that short. 35 minutes in. Time flies when Craig starts speaking, Dev. Um, but yeah, I think thanks to you to show us all of those cool little bits and pieces, and thanks to Riza for uh, showing us this opportunity. I think both Power Apps
And
and
thanks to my wife who was bringing me tea during the
oh,
presentation.
okay,
I mean,
I saw some movement there. Very good, fantastic. But yeah, thanks so much. I think that's really going to help a lot of people in tricky situations manage that, because instead of creating another a list item and another column and then attaching it and then arranging it, and yeah, I mean that,
and then republish your
yeah,
Power App, and
that's pretty cool that you can use that. So that's definitely uh, an advanced option that works really well. So I'm chuffed with that. Thanks, Greg. Hope everyone got value out of
cool,
that.
no problem.
And we'll catch you here next week.
Excellent. Thanks all.
Thanks, Craig. Take it easy, bro. Bye.